Hello, welcome back to Leatherheads Footy. My name is Morgan, and on this episode, I'm doing a recap of the last 2 rounds of AFL Fantasy for my personal team. But more importantly, I think I've nailed down the 3 or maybe 4 key reasons why my rankings dropped from 9th to 102nd over the last 4 weeks. These are 4 overarching principles, so I think they'll be applicable to your team, and for future seasons, I think these are really good principles to focus on. I'm still new at this. This is the first time I've actually played a whole season. I like to think I know footy pretty well, but learning the nuances of the fantasy game is something that I'm still in the process of doing. I'm definitely not a master yet. So these are a couple of things that I think would really help. Rambling a little bit, let's get into the video. So, as you can see, and as I mentioned before, overall rank is currently 102nd. That's dropped, as I mentioned, from 9th 4 weeks ago. Currently outside of winning a hat, which not happy about. I really want a hat. Roy Laird's killing me as a non-owner, especially 163 last weekend. That hurts, especially when my captain gets a 91. I'll touch on captains a little bit later, but yeah, round rank of 15,000, that's not going to get me anywhere. Captain no good, just no real terrible scores. English 58, Sicily 70. Yeah. They're not terrible, but just not really many big scores and a lot of sort of 90s and 80s, which isn't good enough at this time of year when most people's premiums are pumping out, 120s, 130s, 140s. And yeah, I got the feeling a couple of weeks ago, I mentioned it, that I feel like the teams around me are better than mine, and that's come to fruition. So we'll just touch on round 17 as well, look at my trade. So yeah, by last week I was already out to 50, so the fall kept coming. Traded in English for Anderson, which I think is still a good trade. Anderson just too unreliable, even though he got a 140 that week. Inconsistent role and injury concern. I apologise to anyone who traded him in after my advice. I will learn from that next time and just go with more certain players. And that's one of the main principles. I'll get to that in a second. Traded in Tim English. Again, solid round, but just some 90s and 80s across the board and no real big scores apart from Mills, who I have been unable to catch with a captaincy score. Captained him twice for a 70 and a 50. And then last week, Oliver out. I considered holding him. This hurts. If I had held him, I would have brought in Carmichael, who scored 111, and I would have had the chance to loop Carmichael into Burgoyne, into D'Ambrosio, and just take the best score. Carmichael played first, so I would have had 111 for Oliver, and then I would have Oliver playing this week, but trading him wasn't bad either, because it meant that I'd get Sean Darcy up to Bailey Smith and Oliver to Walsh. I see that as maybe a tiny downgrade, maybe 5 points average downgrade, but this I think is a big upgrade, probably gets me 20 more points on field. So I'm happy with that. But without further ado, I'll get to the principles. So I started off not that well this year, but as I mentioned, I've been inside the top 10. I was ranked 11th one week, I was ranked 9th another week, and those weeks were like 5 weeks apart. So started pretty well, and now I'm falling, and I can't really see me finishing inside the top 100 now. So it's been quite a significant fall, and I've been thinking about it, and I'm pretty sure I know what I did wrong. Unfortunately, the mistakes that I've made are sort of irreversible, and they're long-term mistakes, so I can't actually fix it now. And yeah, I'll just get into it. So I've written them down on my little notepad. Basically, the first mistake that I think I made is I swapped my focus from cash generation to points on field too early in the season. So at the start of the year, I think almost you don't think about points. You don't really think about your ranking or your round ranking. All you really want is for as many players as possible to be increasing in price by as much as possible. And that's all I did for the first like 4-5 rounds of the season. All I wanted to do was make sure that I had every bench rookie playing, and all of my players were going up in value. So I jumped on round 2 trades. I jumped on 2 mid prices I thought I missed in Heaney and Sicily. And then rounds 3, 4, and 5, all I was doing was downgrading rookies who weren't named to rookies that were named, and swapping out guys who I thought had stopped generating cash to guys who I thought would continue to generate cash. Throughout this process, I was banking cash, and then it meant that from rounds 5 to 11, I was able to upgrade and trade up to really good premiums and improve my team that way. But even when I'm upgrading to premiums, I'm trying to make sure that I've got all my rookies playing to make sure I keep generating cash. So that was the first thing, is I've focused on cash generation at the start of the year. And then through the buy rounds, I kept hearing people like experts, whatever podcasts and stuff that I listened to, kept saying you want to have your team finished, completed by the end of the buy rounds. And I thought, oh shit, like the way I'm tracking, I didn't think that I could have my team completed by the end of the buy rounds, but I felt I sort of listened too much to that, and it meant that I was sort of rushing through trades, and I was actually trading out guys before it would have been their time. Like I was trading out rookies when they still had 50, 100k to go. Traded out Saligo when he still had 100k to make, even though I knew that he was a good rookie and I would be happy fielding him if I had to. Traded out Jeffrey when he still had like a really low, even negative break even, because I was so like hell bent on finishing my team. And that meant that I started compromising cash generation, just trying to get points on field, because I've heard some random people say that you want to have your team completed by the end of the buy rounds. That meant that when I had those 3 trades throughout the buy rounds, I wasn't using them to continually improve my team in the long term. I was using them to improve my team in the short term and just try and get points on field. That leads into the second mistake that I made, was during the buy rounds, I got a little bit obsessed with having too many players on field. In hindsight, I should have just tried to get 18 players on field, and as long as I had 18 playing players, then just do the best downgrades to make sure that my rookies were still playing, that I was getting in guys with low break evens, and that I continued to generate cash. If I could upgrade to an actual premium that was going to be in my team for the rest of the year, then do that. But first priority, just make sure I have 18 on field, and then keep my rookies ticking over, make sure that's sorted. Instead of doing that, I was a bit obsessed with having like 20 or 21 players on field. And that meant that I was, as I mentioned, trading out guys before they'd reached their final price, when they still had cash to generate. It meant that I was like sideways trading a few guys, like going from 700k guys to another 700k guy instead of going up to like an 800k primo. Doing all of this just to make sure I had 20 or 21 playing players throughout the buy rounds. And I did. I had at least 20 playing in each buy round, but it didn't matter because the extra players I had playing weren't primos, they were rookies. So they were scoring 40s. My rookie's score that ended up getting counted was like a 40 or a 50. So maybe, best case scenario, I was making 20 extra points a week over the 3 weeks. But what I was sacrificing in terms of using those trades, wasting those trades essentially, and not getting cash generation, was by far not worth those extra 20 points a week. So that's my second mistake. First mistake, swapping my focus from cash generation to points on field too early in the season. Second mistake was being too obsessed with having heaps of players on field during the buy rounds. I think from now on, just 18 players on field, that is fine. Because an extra rookie playing, their score dropping off, it isn't going to help you too much, and you're wasting a valuable trade. The third mistake that I made is once again, these sort of all blend into each other, and it all came around that buy period. I started compromising on the primos that I was bringing in to sort of rush the completion of my team. This was something that I told myself I wouldn't do at the start of the year because I thought it was a good principle to play the game with, and I compromised on that value, and I compromised on the quality of player that I was bringing into my team. So early in the year, the primos that I brought in, as I mentioned, from about round 5 onwards, I brought in Doherty at 870k, Mills at 850, Took at 874, Oliver at 899, Petrarca at 854, Dawson at 809, and then I started to maybe get a little bit cheap, I guess. Like I didn't want to spend all of the money. I didn't want to wait the extra week, which is probably what it's more about, is patience rather than stinginess. I didn't want to have to wait the extra week playing a rookie, so I'd get the guy that I could afford instead of waiting and getting the guy that I really wanted. So after I brought in Dawson at 809, then I went through a period where I brought in Witts at 755. He was on a good run, but I could afford English, and I knew English was a better player and was more likely to be a keeper than Witts, but I chose Witts because I thought he was better value. That's a mistake, particularly in the ruck line when you've only got 2 players on field. You can't really afford to be compromising because there's probably going to be a decent gap between the top guys and the next couple. Brought in Jed Anderson for 698. Already mentioned that. Could have been a great pick. He did pump out a 140, but he followed it up with a 50 or so. But once again, compromising on a guy who's not really a proven scorer, even though he did well in the COVID year. I brought in Wines at 809. Probably a little bit cheap for a midfielder for now, and I want to be shopping around that 850k for mids. That's about as low as the good mids get, I'm finding out. So Wines a little bit. I also rushed into that. I could have waited a week or waited a night. Wines would have been locked out, and I would have been able to get Zach Merritt in, and that would have allowed me to get Jacob Ware instead of Jordan Boyd from Carlton. So I also rushed into that decision, but that's a separate point. Then I brought in English, that's fine. Bont, that's fine. Darcy, 715 in the ruck. Not ideal, once again, sort of compromising, but all the other rucks were injured, so that's fine. And then I brought in Taranto at 784. Once again, compromising a little bit on price. Could have gone maybe up to a Parker who was safer, but with less of a ceiling. But Taranto was one of few forwards that I didn't. I already had all the good forwards, basically, because Bailey Smith wasn't playing. I've fixed that a little bit in the last couple of weeks. I brought in Sinclair, brought English back in after his injury, Sam Walsh and Bailey Smith. So that's the third thing is I think it's really important that when you're bringing in a premium, you're bringing them in for the rest of the year. And even though it might look like a saving of 100k, by the end of the year when they've played 10 rounds, the difference in points I think would be more than the 100k that you're saving is worth. Yeah, you really need reliable guys, and you need guys not just reliable week to week, but reliable for the course of the season, that are certain in their positions, that play high time on ground, that have really good roles. So that is the third point. In summary, moving forward, I think it's important to purely focus on cash generation as a priority, and then points on field is your second priority for the maybe first 10 rounds of the season. Even through the bye rounds, keep focusing on cash generation. Secondly, during the bye rounds, you only need 18 on field. I went a little bit crazy with this. You don't need 20 or 21 because it'll just be an extra couple of rookies whose scores won't count anyway. So 18 on field is fine. Use those trades for cash generation and to improve your team. And thirdly, don't compromise on your premos. Be shopping around that 800k for defenders and forwards, 850k for midfielders, and probably about 800 for rucks, depending on the ruck situation in that year. The last thing I'll touch on is just a little bit of luck that is something worth considering if maybe your rank's falling or rising and you don't really know what to attribute it to. So the last 5 weeks where I've had a bit of a rough run, my captains have scored 90, 97, 54, 106 and 91 for an average of 88. That's with vice captain and captain loophole, or the vice captain loophole. So with 2 goes, I'm still averaging 88 with my captains over the last 5 weeks. Prior to that, I was averaging 123. So lucky, unlucky, whatever you want to call it. That's another reason why I would have been doing better for the first part of the season than I have been for the last 5 weeks. Captain's averaging 123 for first 13 rounds of the year is nuts, and probably got pretty lucky, and that was inflating my rank a little bit higher than it probably deserved to be. My team probably wasn't good enough to be inside the top 10 without getting lucky or just picking good captains. That's the final thing. I hope this is helpful. At the end of the year, I'll do a recap. Like I mentioned, I'm still learning, but I think it's good making these mistakes is helping to sort of cement the principles of fantasy and what you need to do over the course of the season, like bigger picture things in order to do well. Bump the microphone, I apologize. So at the end of the year, I'll do a recap with all the things I learned and some fundamentals that you should focus on, I should focus on, we all should focus on for moving forward. I'm also going to do my everything you need to know about AFL Fantasy video. Those two might be connected. Thanks for listening. I'll keep up the fantasy content. See ya.